This afternoon, the scripture reading is from John chapter 12, verses 1 through 8. I'll be reading from the New King James Version. Then 6 days before the Passover, Jesus came to Bethany, where Lazarus, who had been dead, whom he had been raised from the dead. Then they made him a supper, and Martha served, but Lazarus was one of those who sat at the table with him. Then Mary took a pound of very costly oil of spikenard, anointed the feet of Jesus, and wiped his feet with her hair. And the house was filled with the fragrance of the oil. But one of his disciples, Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, who would betray him, said, "Why was this fragrant oil not sold for 300 denarii and given to the poor?" This he said, not that he cared for the poor, but because he was a thief, and had the money box, and he used to take what was put in it. But Jesus said, "Let her alone. She has kept this for the day of my burial. For the poor you have with you always, but me you do not have always."
Be seated, please. In this narrative from John chapter 12, which is somewhat connected to John chapter 11, the death of Lazarus, we find a lady that was willing to give up so much more than we certainly think about because of her love for Jesus Christ. You know, we live in a world today where some people are all about giving, and sadly, more folks seem to be all about getting. Let me ask you a question. Can you think of some people, maybe in your past or even presently, that just seem to have a knack for giving? And it may not just be money. It may be time. It may be something they have. It may be something that they're abundantly blessed with. I don't want to be personal, but I wish you had known my wife's parents. They were tremendously giving people. Whenever we would go, and I guess they felt sorry for us as starting out with young newlyweds, but even while we were growing up with the kids, every time we would run back home to Northport out to their farm, we would go back home with a car full of things that they had given us. A lot of it was the produce from the garden, the canned goods that they had, sometimes some of the meat that they had processed and killed. But invariably, they were tremendously giving people, not just to us, but anybody and everybody that they loved. This past, I guess it was yesterday, I watched a ESPN report on a particular coach that I like to follow and the team that he's a part of. But they were talking about last Saturday in Tuscaloosa that there was a program in which several hundred kids from not only the Tuscaloosa area, but all over the state were invited there to be a part of what was called Nick's Kids. Now, usually people would think that that has to do with the coach of that particular football team. That's wrong. It started with his father, and Nick is the father, and thus his foundation that has been set up for several years has reference to Nick's Kids. This coach said that when he was 23 years old, his dad had already been doing this as a high school coach, trying to see to the needs, the welfare of particularly either special needs kids or others that were just underprivileged. But after his father's death, Nick Jr. was talked to by his mother, and she said, when you, this was at the age of 23, if you ever get to the point of life that you financially and otherwise can do so, I hope you would see fit to continue the legacy that your dad had in seeing to the needs of particular special needs kids and underprivileged kids. And thus this past Saturday, several thousands of dollars. Several $1 million have been given since the inception of that. And Coach Saban made the point. He said, you know, there are a lot of other coaches that need to follow suit, not because I'm doing it, but because it's the right thing to do. Because we have been blessed so very much in our business. You know, there are some people that just are giving individuals, and it's not just folks like them, it's also folks like you that give so very much because of what you have, regardless of how little or how much it is, you're willing to share it with others. Unfortunately, we also know that there are a lot of folks that like to get. They're all about the getting business. And in this narrative of John chapter 12, we have someone that wanted to give, and we also had someone that wanted to get. You may recall that Christ reminded us in Luke chapter 12 and given us a parable about a rich farmer that forgot about everyone else but himself. That one's life does not consist in the abundance of the things that he possesses. As Jesus said in Luke chapter 12 in verse 15. It's just not what we have, the things of this world, that really matter. It's what we do with those things that really matter. You know, think about it. The things that you and I need, the things that are really valuable, the things at the top of our list, if we were going to prioritize them in regard to being most important, they've been given to us. They've been given to us. Think about it. Our parents, we didn't select them. They selected us, or they brought us into the world, wherever the case may be. Our mate, and yet there's another example of my in-laws and what they gave. They gave me the most precious person in the world. Our children, all these things of life that have been given to us. And the same is true in regard to freedom. And even if you served our country, and we thank you for your service, you by yourself did not do it all alone. Someone else, and particularly many people years before, did something to ensure us the freedom that you and I so often enjoy and take for granted. God gave us air. How many times, seriously, how many times have we thanked God for the oxygen that we have in which we can breathe? Probably not, hardly any of us. And yet, you and I know we need it, but it's been given to us. And then, of course, life itself. I think James gives us a practical understanding of that. In James chapter 1, after talking about sin and where sin comes from, and that sin comes from us deciding that we're going to do it our way rather than God's way, he says, every good gift and every perfect gift is from above and comes down with the Father of lights, with whom there's no variation or shadow of turning. Of his own will he brought us forth by the word of truth, that we might be a kind of first fruits in his creatures. Therefore, my beloved brethren, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath, for the wrath of man does not produce the righteousness of God. Did you catch that? Of his own will. We know John 3, verse 16, God so loved the world. But you see, the point of the matter is, way before God ever made this world, the Bible tells us, he decided that he was going to create us in his image. But now here's the question. Why is it that so many, instead of giving, want to get? And we're going to come back to that just in a moment and look at that from different perspectives. But we live in a world, as even in John chapter 12 we find out, where one was willing to give, but yet somebody else just wanted to get. The phrase God gives I thought when I was studying this a few weeks ago, I said, well, surely that phrase is found in the Bible, and it's probably found a multiplicity of times. Well, it's only found 12 times. 11 of them are positive. God gives things in a positive way. The phrase God gave is found some 17 times in the Bible. But think about it. We are made in God's image. He created us in His image. He put something eternal inside of each one of us, a part of Him to a part of us. So we're made in God's image, but let me ask the question, why is it, if we're made in God's image, that we're so different than Him when it comes to this idea of giving? Could it be that our value system is all messed up? I talked a few weeks ago about the things that we used to have when we were growing up, or the things when several of us, when we started out as newlyweds, the things that we would have in our houses. We were so proud of those things. And most of them were found alongside the road somewhere, or some loved one was trying to get rid of something out of their house and they handed them to us. Or we'd go out to a thrift store or to a garage sale or a yard sale and buy it. But we were so extremely proud of those things because they belonged to us. But what's wrong when our value system says we need to be thinking about us more than we often do, instead of others? I think it's because we forget that we're a soul with a body wrapped around it, not the other way around. We need to look at it from God's perspective. Because as Jesus would remind us in Matthew chapter 16, the one thing that people are willing to give away the most is the one thing that Jesus said was worth more than all the world. What will a man profit if he gains the whole world and yet doing so lose his own soul? We may not give the way God gives because we forgot and understanding what happiness really is. You know, happiness is not so much in the things you have. It's being willing to be content with what you have. I read just a couple of days ago, one of the large universities up east, I think it was either Princeton or Yale or somebody, but they did a study. And the study was the way we in our country look at material things of life. And they noticed something that was rather unusual. The more religious one is, the more that one is committed to their religious faith, the less actual things they buy with their money, versus those who have no religious value at all. And their indication, their ultimate understanding was there's something about religious faith and understanding who we are and who we belong to and what we are here for and where we hopefully, prayerfully are going, that has something to do with what we decide to do with our money and the possessions that we own. I thought that was a rather interesting study. Happiness is not so much in what we have, it's what we do with it or what we can do without. You see, we forget that it was the Lord that actually said it's more blessed to give than it is to receive. Well, I mentioned that we're going to go back to John chapter 12. And in John chapter 12, we have this particular narrative. Jesus has raised Lazarus from the grave, chapter 11 of John. There's a great feast. Martha is fixing food. Mary decides to take a bottle of ointment, very precious ointment, perfume, and to use that at the end of the service or the end of the meal to anoint both the feet and the hair of Jesus Christ. Now, we don't know exactly why she had this expensive perfume. Text doesn't tell us. They speculate that it would have been worth a whole year of wages. So it was very costly. But it's rather interesting that she decided on that time, at that time, on that occasion, to offer it unannounced as a gift to the Lord. And by doing so, it blessed everyone. Did you catch the phrase in John chapter 12 that the fragrance filled the entire house? Everybody that was there for that dinner got to smell, got to as it were, enjoy that precious ointment on that occasion. And as I mentioned a moment ago, it was totally unannounced. She gave it with nothing attached to it. Lord, I want you to remember me. Oh, Lord, I want you to do this for me. Lord, nothing at all. And as Jesus said on that occasion, let her alone, because what she has done is going to be something said about her until time ends. And here we are almost 2,000 years removed from that actual event of history, and that's exactly what we're doing. We're talking about her in a very commendable, loving way because of what she gave on that occasion. Is it any wonder that Jesus loved Martha and Mary and Lazarus? I mean, how many, several occasions in Scripture where Jesus would go to Martha's house, Martha gave. Lazarus was a dear friend of his, and of course, as we know, John chapter 11, he raised him from the dead. And then Mary, what she gave. Indeed, he had no doubt in knowing that they loved him greatly. Now, Judas, on the other hand, was not interested in giving, he was interested in getting. And the text gives us rather interesting commentary on him. In fact, there's more said about Judas here than some of the other gospel accounts, because I checked the other accounts. But John just sort of tells it like it is, again through the inspiration of God's Spirit. Judas would have liked to have stolen that, because as the text tells us, he kept the money bag and he had taken things out of it already before. You see, he was not interested in honoring Jesus Christ. And it's rather interesting that one commentator says, when Judas realized on this occasion, as the Lord said, this is the anointment before I go to the cross to die for the sins of the world, Judas realized finally, I'm not going to get rich off this guy. There's no mistake here. Jesus is going to give his life as a ransom for many. And so what did he do? He goes out and makes all the money he can make off Jesus by selling him to the Jews for 30 pieces of silver, the price of a common slave. He simply wanted to get, not give. Now, you may be thinking, well, you're pretty hard on Judas, aren't you? Well, look at what he did. I mean, how harsh can it be for someone to be willing to go and to give up your master, having seen the things that he had seen with his own eyes, having heard the things that he heard with his ears, having taught with Jesus, having just had his feet washed by Jesus, and yet wanting to betray him to get a little money. So I guess we take the point and we ask the question today, okay, now what do we do with the giving versus getting? You see, getting leads to suicide of one kind or the other. We know Judas committed suicide, ultimate death. But yet, if that happens to those today in our world and will eventually at the end of time, because if all you are about is what you can get into this world, you're going to end up that way as well, unprepared to meet God. It's like the parable that Jesus told there in Luke chapter 12. God says to him, "This day your soul shall be required of you, and then who shall these things be that you provide, that you've hoarded up for?" God called him a fool because he thought that actually the things that he had were more important than the things that he could give. It also, like Judas, leads to betrayal. If nothing else, the betrayal of our soul, our eternal soul that God put within each one of us for the things of this life. Typically speaking, though, people that are always in it for just the money, they will betray others as well. We live in a world today where it's me, myself, and I in many businesses. It's not what's good for you, and it's not what's good for this person, it's what's good for me that so many individuals are enamored with. And ultimately, one will never find happiness. And the reason is because a person that's always wanting to get will never have enough for them to be happy. It's just one more dollar, one more day, one more hour of work, one more this or that and the other that we want to be involved in that will rob us of any kind of real joy or any time with meaningful friends or family that matter so much more importantly than us. But what about giving? Would you say that giving produces a heart of love? I think so, and we have in this narrative of John 12 that very picture. Look at Mary. She even took her hair down, likely, and used it to wipe the feet of Jesus with her hair. She gave everything she had in that regard to the Lord. It also has a way of giving us something back in return. You may recall in Luke chapter 6 and verse 38, Jesus said, "Give and it shall be given unto you." And then he begins to give us sort of a word picture. It's like the out of a bucket. It just begins to fill up, and then it just sort of flows over and over and over again. And that's the way Jesus said that men will give into your bosom if you give without any kind of qualification, if you give purposely, if you give in a loving kind of way. People that give also receive blessings as well, which therefore creates more opportunities to give. Again, not meaning to talk about sports, but what Nick Jr. has been able to do because of his father has blessed thousands of folks and millions of dollars. And I'm sure that there are other schools, and I hope there are other coaches and other foundations that do the very same thing because they've been blessed financially, simply because it gives them more opportunity to help others in need in one way or the other. The most important thing about giving is this: it takes us closer to the heart of God. And folks, I don't know about you, but I think as we gain respect and maturity and understanding and honor and all the other things that we do as we get older, all of us should wish to be closer to the heart of God. And when you give the way that Mary gave, you're close to God's heart. I know in this audience that there are individuals that do give, and you give in a closet. You give without anybody knowing about it. And occasionally somebody may hear or may say a word that others will hear and say, well, that's wonderful. But you see, God sees those things, and God understands those things. And God will bless those individuals for what they did and what they continue to do. In John chapter 12, one gave, but someone wanted to take away. What about you? Where do you fall in that category today with your life, with your possessions, with your time, with your efforts, with your desires? God knows the answer. If you need to become a New Testament Christian this afternoon, or if you've wandered away and need to come back and start all over again, we invite you to come. And together we stand and sing the invitation.